Personal preparedness is the foundation for all preparedness. But ultimately, I really believe that we really need to come into a place where neighborhood preparedness is part of the core community readiness that's going to allow us to really make it. Because you may be individually prepared, but if you're not prepared as a community, it's going to be a little bit like trying to sweep a floor with one single straw, as opposed to binding them all together and making a broom out of it. And I think if you're able to actually come together in the way that I believe the Lord wants us to as a community, that you're going to be able to be so much stronger. And one of the unique things that you have here at Morningside is you have a commonality of faith. You have Jesus Christ as the foundation for your lives, and that's something that brings you together, that should allow you to be able to work together in greater harmony and be more effective. Now, I realize this is being broadcast, that we're able to see this on live streaming, so I'm not going to make the comments just related to Morningside, but I want to really emphasize Morningside because I think you have some unique challenges, and I would like to be able to help you in that regard. Now, I know that you're not part of the group that says it won't happen to me. I think you run into a possible problem here at Morningside, and that is you feel like everything is taken care of for you, yourself, and that other people are going to come to your rescue, and everything's going to be all right just for you because you're here. Do you know what I'm talking about? That you're going to say, this is a safe environment, so everything's going to work out, and other people are going to take care of me. This is not a good attitude to have, because you don't really know who is going to be able to be there. And later on, we're going to be discussing certain issues regarding security, and that's going to be a very major issue that you're going to have to face, issues of fire or major storms, like if you had major tornadoes go through. You are on an individual basis, individual families, individual couples. You're going to need to be able to be prepared yourself and take care of yourself to the extent that you can without relying on other people. And if you're just always saying that somebody else is going to be there, you're going to be making the wrong judgment. In fact, I have a Christian sheriff over in the area close by where I live. He said, you know, we only have a few hundred officers, and we have, I forget how many thousands of people in that particular region that are responsible for. And he said, every one of them thinks that when a disaster strikes that we're going to be right there for them. And he says, there's no way that we can handle the volume of need that will be there on a major disaster. In fact, he was talking about what might have to happen if he had to deputize individuals that have either military background or police background of some sort. But he just realized, even as a sheriff, he says, I just cannot be there for everybody. And so one of the problems that you might have here at Morningside is you might say, well, other people are going to take care of me. We're a community that will take care of each other. Well, to a certain extent, that's very true, and you have a unique situation here, but I'm going to discuss more of that with you later on. We all know that disasters are increasing in frequency, but if you have a plan ahead of time, you're going to be able to be so much better, and you have a lot greater safety factor there for you. In fact, one of the things that I'm going to be talking about later on is that I really think you should develop a sort of a buddy system here at Morningside. Those of you that are within this particular complex, or even those that are out on the grounds, whether you have cabins or mobile homes or other type of living arrangements, you should have some sort of a buddy system. I don't know if any of you have ever been on some foreign travel trips, but usually what we would do is we would assign two people together and say, you be responsible for each other. So when we'd have people come back on the bus, we'd say, is your accountability partner here? And if everybody said yes, then we knew we had all the ducks on board. And I would say the same thing for you here at Morningside, that you're going to want to be able to have some sort of a accountability system in place, and we'll discuss that further. And I would imagine that living here and hearing the different programs that are broadcast on the Jim Bakker Show, you probably have one of the greatest doses of preparedness of anybody. But I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because I think that'd be a little bit embarrassing in this particular setting, but I doubt if all of you are really fully prepared. And I'm looking at some of the reactions around here from my vantage point. Actually, I've spoken at several conferences where I was dealing with first responders, EMTs, police, firemen. And I asked them, how many of you actually have grab-and-go bags at your home, taking care of your own family? How many of you have actually prepared for your own family? Less than 10% of the first responders had actually taken care of their own families. They knew how to respond, but they hadn't taken care of themselves. I have a sneaking suspicion that some of you are saying, well, if I'm not fully prepared, my neighbor will be. And I'll just go to my... And have any of you thought that, would you be willing to admit that maybe that thought crossed your mind, that at least we have so many neighbors that are going to be prepared? And unfortunately, I've sometimes had situations with my own family where they said, well, Dad, we know that you're prepared. We'll just come to you if ever we have some difficulties, you know. But I say, don't you do that. I said, what I think I might have enough for X number of months of material, the moment the other family members come, it gets dwindled down to a very small amount of time when you start feeding a whole bunch of people. Actually, that's one of the major reasons for getting your neighbors to be prepared, is because they won't be knocking on your door. Okay, if they're not prepared, they will come, and I'll guarantee you, you're not going to turn away family or neighbors that you know well. And so you may be fully prepared yourself, but you also need to know how prepared your neighbors are. And that's going to be something we're going to discuss under Map Your Neighborhood when we get into neighborhood preparedness. And so it's a matter of putting on your own mask first. This is not a selfish act, but you really do need to be able to make sure you and your family are prepared first. And one of the things that I think that maybe some of you might not be aware of or having prepared for. I'd be curious to know how many of you live here but do not have transportation to leave of your own, that you're dependent on somebody else's transportation to go into Branson or other places. I'd be curious to know how many of you actually, okay, there's a couple hands that have been raised. In other words, if you don't have your own transportation, then you're not going to be able to immediately determine when it is that you're going to be able to leave. And by the way, if ever you do have to evacuate, I would say to you, make sure that you have at least a half tank of gas at all times. You know, most cars will go 300 to 400 miles on a tank of gas. A half tank of gas, so that'll give you 150 to 200 miles if ever you have to leave the area. And you're saying, well, this is not the area that I would ever have to leave because we're so prepared here. I'm not so sure that's necessarily true. Part of it could, there could be some devastating disasters that would occur, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but what if you lost electricity for a prolonged period of time, not something a generator would handle? You might have to leave for some reason because you can't continue to sustain living here for a period of time, or you might have to leave temporarily for just a few weeks or a month or two. So you can't always depend upon things just being business as usual. I think you've all heard, most of you would have heard my story regarding horses or zebras, when I was in medical school, they would teach us how to diagnose various diseases and disorders. And so they would say, when you hear hoofbeats behind you, what do you think of first? And you say, well, horses is what you think of here in the United States. Now, I've been in enough countries, been 105 countries, that sometimes it might be wildebeest or zebras or something else that I would be hearing if I heard hoofbeats. But for us here in the States, we believe in horses, so that if we heard hoofbeats, we would be thinking about horses. What are the common things that you have here? And of course, I would be very familiar with this. Even coming in today, we were concerned about the weather and lightning and storms and rain. And then, of course, tornadoes are very common here. Flooding is a major issue. In fact, I think you've had a drop or two of water lately, haven't you? Yeah, so that you've had some major flooding. In fact, one time I was here a couple of years ago, and I remember when Dino Kartsanakis' home was absolutely totally flooded, and his piano was floating upside down in his house. And so, you know, there's various issues that you're going to have to face here as well. And of course, everybody would be vulnerable to an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. I think most of you have at least heard of 1 Second After, Bill Fortune's book there. I told my wife, don't read it. It is such a realistic book as to what could actually happen with an EMP. But be prepared for your horses, and then you'll be more likely ready for your zebras, which are the uncommon things, the terrorism, the EMPs, the pandemics. Those are your zebras. I think that when I go through the list of the various things that you have here, that you expect floods, and even though you don't have hurricanes here per se, you have the tornadoes, you probably have the effects of hurricanes. Just like where I live in North Carolina, North Carolina experiences quite a few hurricanes. That's on the East Coast. I live on the West Coast, which the hurricanes don't reach that far inland. But we actually had 8 inches of rain related to a hurricane. It flooded the area where I live in the mountainous area, and there was 4 to 5 feet of water in some of the roads below my home. I couldn't even get out into town because of the flooding, and I had to learn back roads going up over the mountains to be able to get back into town. It took me about a half an hour rather than the typical 5 to 10 minutes to getting into town. But you have obviously ice storms. How many of you have actually had loss of power for a number of days due to ice storms? Be curious. Okay, so a number of you have done that now, have had that experience. Now I know right now if you're in this particular facility, you have a generator. But maybe a lot of you do not have generators, or maybe the generator will only work for 3-4 days, or maybe up to a week. What are you going to do if there's a long-term loss of power? Have you thought about that? I know that the Jim Bakker Show has been talking about some of these solar-powered batteries, and that is excellent for a certain amount of power, but it's not going to power up a house. It's not going to be able to take care of a complete house if you need that. I myself am in a very vulnerable position in that I'm on a well water that requires electricity to pump the water. So if I don't have electricity, I'm vulnerable. And so I'm actually in the process right now of installing a larger generator into our home, and I already have put in 2 wood-burning stoves. One is an insert into our fireplace, and the other is a freestanding wood-burning stove. And so if ever you lost power for a long time, are you able to heat where you live? Are you able to take care of yourself? These are questions that you definitely have to answer. And then if you lost long-term refrigeration and freezing, are you going to lose the foodstuffs that you have? Are you prepared for that? Are you taking that into account? Now, do you have many earthquakes around here? Not too many, because I noticed in Oklahoma they were having a number of earthquakes. They were not a large magnitude. I didn't know how much it was affecting your particular area, but we're not too far away from the New Madrid Fault, which many people have predicted, including Pastor Kilpatrick. He believes that there may come a time in which that will go off, and if that actually would happen, the Mississippi River last time flowed backwards, and Lake Bigfoot was formed in Tennessee due to that time. And one of the things that would happen if that type of thing would occur, the bridges going across the Mississippi River would collapse. The gas lines and other communication across the river would probably be disrupted. And that would disrupt food supplies coming in from the West Coast and trucking. And that would have a major impact on you. Now, I know that one of the big things that Jim Bakker has been doing has been pushing the long-term food storage, which I think is excellent. And I think that people should have as much as they can have. And one of the reasons why I would even suggest that you have more than what's recommended many times is because I think you may have to take care of family. You may have to take care of other people. And so you have to kind of keep in the back of your mind, who is it that might very well come knocking on my door? Now, this particular PowerPoint that I'm showing you, H2O, what you need to know, water, of course, is number one factor that you need to make sure you have safe water. Now, there are many different ways of making water safe. It can be filtered. There are special filters out there that will actually take care of bacteria as well as viruses, but majority of them do not. Most of them will take care of Giardia and Cryptosporidia, things that you would expect to encounter, say, if you were camping and getting water from a lake or a river. but you really need to be able to take care of viruses and bacteria, particularly if you have contamination of your water supply. This can be done chemically, like chlorine dioxide tablets or liquid can be used. You can also use iodine, and Clorox can actually be utilized as well. There are different ways you can purify it, but one of the neat things is you can also do it by boiling. And this is one thing I do recommend you have, is just have a simple solar oven. And they're not very expensive, but you can bring temperatures with a solar oven up to over 300 degrees. You can easily boil water with a solar oven, and so that's a simple way that you don't have to rely upon any kind of other energy source. In fact, as a good Boy Scout or Girl Scout, you could make your own solar oven with cardboard and tin foil and create your own. So that's something that you need to keep in mind, but you need to also have some means of filtering the water in your cars, and if you do work at your workplace, also at your home, and have a separate one for each family member. I think that's going to be very important that you do that. But you're going to really need to have safe water. And just stop and think. In some places, now this may be more for those that are listening online, if you're in a place where you really don't have access to water readily, you need to probably have some stored. There's 55-gallon drums available that you can store water, and you can actually treat it. And if you treat it and seal it properly, the water will be good for 5 years. And even if it gets contaminated, you can then just filter that. Be thinking about having to be able to have water safe. So one of the things is, if you have a water tank, though, in your home, and this is obviously going out over a live stream as well, if ever there is a disaster in the area where you're at, shut the water off from the outside water source so that the water in your water tank is safe. You may not have thought about that, but if you have a 40, 50, or larger gallon tank of water in your home, that is safe water to drink. It'll taste yuck if you just try to drink it straight. But what you can do is, if you shut it off, and by the way, if you do shut it off, turn off the power to the water tank so that when you drain it, you're not going to end up having electric power going to it where it's continuing trying to heat the water. But that water is safe water. And you can drain water out of the bottom of the tank, put it into a pan so you collect the rust and crud that's at the bottom of these water tanks, and then filter the water at that point, and it'll take care of the bad taste, the metallic taste, and so forth of the water that's in your water tank. You need about a half gallon of water a day per person. So if you had a 50-gallon tank, then you would actually have 100 days for one person of water in a 50-gallon tank. If you had 4 people, then divide that by 4, and so you'd have 25 days of water for 4 people. That would be safe drinking water, and you need to be thinking about that. And so if you have the means to be able to drain the water, of course you've shut it off first so that you're not having contaminated water coming in, and then you actually have safe drinking water if you had to just use that. One of the things that really bothered me when we responded up to Superstorm Sandy in those high-rises was that many people in those 25, 30, 40-story buildings did not have water even for 2-3 days. At a half gallon a day, they could have just had a few jugs of water and they would have been fine. But they were saying, come and help us, we don't have water. And people were having to bring water all those flights of stairs because they hadn't taken the time to just have enough water for half gallon per person per day for drinking water. And so that's something that I really want to encourage you with. And of course, I'm going to skip over this pretty quick because you're also familiar with making sure that you don't get caught with your pantry down. Having adequate food storage, that's actually a title from a book that I came across, and I really liked it. I've actually tried some canning myself. That's one of the things that you can do. You can also not only have the freeze-dried food, canning, you can also dehydrate fruits. You can actually do your own Mylar bag sealing of foods. And I would recommend that you do all those things. And also, I get canned goods. And by the way, it can get very expensive if you buy at the regular price. But if you're willing to buy dented cans with good dates, those are good. And plus, I actually use canned goods out to 1 to 2 years beyond their expiration dates, as long as the lid is not popped up and there's no evidence of any contamination. And when you open it up, if it's not a bad smell, then that food is very good. So what we do is we say, eat what you, store what you eat and eat what you store, and do a rotational basis with that. I'm not going to say more about that because I would imagine most of you have probably put some of that freeze-dried food back somewhere. In fact, one of the things that I've done with my children, we bought them some Christmas presents of buckets of food. So they thought that was a rather strange gift, but I think that some of us grandparents, I've got 8 grandkids, we sometimes have a little bit more understanding maybe of what's coming down the pike, and our kids sometimes are so busy with life and living life that they don't seem to have time to be able to handle these things. The other thing I'd like to just mention is that cash is king. You really should, I say, have at least $500 worth of small bills at home. The truth is, I'd say have more. Have as much small bills at home, and I'm saying 1s, 5s, 10s. Consider 20 as a large bill, because the last thing you want to do is go and pay for a $5 item with a $50 bill or $100 bill, because in major disasters, you're not going to have electricity. People aren't going to be able to go to an ATM. You're not going to be able to have transactions with your credit card, and you're going to have to pay cash for whatever it is that you do. I have a cousin whose daughter was involved with Hurricane Ike. I believe that was one that went through Galveston, I believe. And she read my book just a week or 2 before that came through, and she read my recommendation. She took money out of her bank, and after the hurricane hit, there was 10 days where she had no access to funds. And so you really need to have cash, because you're going to find out that when you don't have electricity, cars can't be filled with gas, you can't go to the bank with the ATMs, and nothing works. I'm going to skip over this other than to say that you need to make sure that all the documents that you have are safely docked, and I would suggest to you that you scan documents, put them onto a USB. You can make multiple copies, carry those with you, and if you yourself do not have the capability of scanning, you can actually take documents into a place like Staples or other place like that. They will scan it for you and put it onto a disk or a USB drive for you. Doesn't cost a lot of money. So if you can't do it yourself, you can do it that way, or get a friend of yours that might have a scanner and actually scan some of these documents for you. But you need to store your documents not just on your own computers and keeping them at home, but you need to put them into a remote storage, like a cloud area. The people down in Bastrop, Texas, where they lost 1,600 homes, if you remember a couple of years ago, they lost everything. Their homes burned down to the foundation. All their documents were gone. You need to somehow keep safe documents. I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to come into facing the unexpected. Do you recognize